the first few days after the news broke were a blur. I barely recognized the world around me, as if the earth had tilted and my feet couldn't quite find the ground. It all started with a phone call, an innocuous ring that shattered the calm of a regular Tuesday morning. I had been in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, when I picked up the receiver. My husband's voice, usually steady and calm, was tight, strained. "I'm suing her." I froze. The words hung in the air like a bad omen, too surreal to comprehend. My mind raced, heart thundering in my chest as I tried to find meaning in what he'd said. My husband, my partner of 25 years, the man who had stood by me through every storm, was suing our daughter. I couldn't even process it fully, couldn't understand how we had arrived at this point. For a long moment, the silence between us was unbearable. I felt as if the walls were closing in, the weight of the situation too much for me to bear. This couldn't be real. How had things come to this? My mind replayed fragments of memories, days when our daughter was small, her laughter filling the house, her childish innocence, the joy of watching her grow into the woman she was. A woman now at odds with her own father, to the point where he had decided to take legal action. Why? I finally managed to whisper. My voice felt foreign, distant. How could I even begin to understand what was happening? The daughter I had raised with so much love, the one who had always been the apple of my eye, was now the subject of a lawsuit filed by her own father. I could hear him on the other end, his breath shaky as if he too had just spoken words he could hardly believe. "It's the only way," he said, though his voice carried none of the conviction it once had. It was the voice of a man who was grappling with the enormity of his actions, yet determined to follow through despite the consequences. "She's crossed a line, and I can't let it go." I didn't know what to say. I still didn't know what he meant. What could possibly have happened between them that would lead him to take such an irreversible step? My thoughts turned inward, spinning around in circles as I tried to make sense of it all. Had I missed something? Had there been a breaking point, something that would explain this rift? Or was it a slow build-up, something that had been festering under the surface for months, years even? I set the phone down carefully, not knowing what to do next. I felt my knees weaken, my legs threatening to buckle under me. I collapsed into a chair, staring at the empty kitchen table. The room felt smaller, somehow, as if the weight of my thoughts had thickened the air. I tried to reach out to him, to find some understanding. But the phone call had ended abruptly. The man I thought I knew had given me no explanation, no reason for his actions other than that it was the only way. My mind kept returning to her. Our daughter. I could hardly picture her now without a sense of disbelief. My heart ached for her, for what this meant. For what it meant for all of us. But more than that, I felt the ache of a mother who had to witness the tearing apart of her family, even if she couldn't fully understand why it was happening. How had we gotten to this point? How could this have gone so terribly wrong? The more I thought about it, the more I felt the heavy burden of not knowing what to do next. How could I fix this? How could I possibly repair the damage that had already been done? My thoughts were a swirl of emotions, confusion, grief, disbelief. I was desperate for answers, but no one had any to offer. Not my husband. Not our daughter. Certainly not me. The uncertainty loomed over me, like a storm waiting to break. The house felt eerily quiet after the phone call. I sat there in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the stillness. My hands trembled as I tried to gather my thoughts, but they seemed to scatter, refusing to form any coherent understanding of the situation. My mind raced through every possible scenario, each more unimaginable than the last. How had we come to this? How had our family, once so united, become so fractured? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the garden. The autumn leaves, golden and falling, seemed so beautiful, so peaceful, utterly unaware of the storm that had just entered our home. I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the family I thought I knew. For years, we had weathered every storm together, supporting one another through all of life's challenges. And now, here I was, alone in the quiet of our home, trying to understand why my husband had made this decision. The more I thought about it, the more my chest tightened. The idea of my husband taking legal action against our daughter, our only child, felt like a betrayal, not just of her, but of me too. He had always been so strong, so reliable, a man of principles. Yet here he was, breaking the very foundation of our family for reasons I couldn't fully grasp. I felt as though the ground beneath me had shifted, and I was left stumbling in the aftermath. I thought back to the days when we were all so close. The family vacations, the quiet dinners, the laughter that once echoed through the house. Where had that all gone? What had happened between them that led to this point? I kept asking myself these questions, over and over, but no answers came. The silence was deafening. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. I looked up, and there she stood, our daughter. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed as if she had been crying. I could see it in her posture, too. She was defeated, not physically, but emotionally. She had always been so strong, so resilient, but now she looked so small, so fragile. She didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway, hesitating as if she didn't know how to approach me. I wanted to speak, to say something comforting, but the words stuck in my throat. I felt a strange mix of emotions, love for her, yes, but also confusion and a sense of loss. What had happened to her? What had happened to us? "Mom," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "Dad, he's really going through with it, isn't he?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I blinked them away. I couldn't let her see me fall apart, not now. She needed me to be strong, to offer her the comfort and reassurance I had always given her. But how could I? How could I offer her anything when I was as lost as she was? "I don't understand," she continued, her voice breaking. "What's happening, Mom? Why is he doing this? We've always been a family, a good one. Why would he do this to me?" Her words echoed in my mind, each one like a knife to my heart. I had no answers for her, no explanations. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that somehow, we would fix this. But I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't even know where to begin. I stepped forward, wrapping my arms around her, holding her tightly against me. Her body trembled, and I could feel the weight of her sadness, her confusion, pressing against me. My heart broke for her, and yet, I couldn't ignore the nagging thought in the back of my mind: why had it come to this? I pulled back slightly, looking into her tear-streaked face. "I don't know, sweetheart," I whispered. "I don't know why your father has done this. But I promise you, I'll try to understand. I'll try to make sense of it, and I'll do whatever I can to help." She nodded, though her expression was one of doubt. I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She didn't believe me, not really. How could she? How could I promise something when I didn't even know what to do myself? She wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. I can't believe it, Mom. I don't know what I did wrong. He's my father. Why is he doing this to me?" I didn't know how to answer her. There were no words that could make it right. I could tell her that I would talk to him, that I would fix it, but deep down, I knew there was no quick fix. No magic words that would make everything okay again. As she walked past me to her room, I stood there in the hallway, feeling like an outsider in my own home. The silence between us was unbearable. I didn't know how to bridge the gap between us, or between her and her father. All I could do was stand there, helpless, unsure of what to say or do next. The house felt colder now, despite the warmth of the sun outside. It was as if the very walls were closing in on me, leaving me with the weight of a decision that was no longer mine to make. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow responsible for this. Somehow, in all of this, I had failed my family. I sank down onto the couch, my hands pressed to my face. I was lost, unable to see the way forward. What was I supposed to do? I had always been the one who held everything together, the one who fixed things when they went wrong. But this was beyond my ability to fix. And I didn't know if I could fix it at all. The house was quiet again, but this time, the silence was different. It was heavier, more oppressive, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something, anything, to break it. I hadn't seen him since the phone call. My husband had gone to his study, retreating into his private world, away from the mess that was quickly unraveling our family. I knew I needed to talk to him, to understand why he had made this decision. But the thought of facing him made my stomach churn. What was there to say? How could I even begin to ask the questions that burned in my mind? I finally gathered the courage, pulling myself up from the couch and making my way down the hall. His study door was slightly ajar, and I could hear the faint sound of his voice, though I couldn't make out the words. He was speaking to someone, perhaps his lawyer, or maybe he was just trying to convince himself that he was doing the right thing. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I needed answers. I knocked gently before entering, and he looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. His eyes, once warm and inviting, now seemed distant and cold. A part of me wanted to recoil, but I forced myself to step inside. "I need to understand," I said quietly, my voice faltering. "Why? Why are you doing this?" He didn't immediately respond, his gaze drifting back to the papers on his desk. There was a brief silence before he sighed, leaning back in his chair. His hands, usually so steady, were trembling as he folded them together in front of him. "I never wanted it to come to this," he said finally, his voice low, almost remorseful. But there was a firmness to it, an edge that I hadn't expected. "But she's made her choices, and I've had enough. This is the only way I can make her understand." I took a step forward, trying to keep my emotions in check. Make her understand what? What did she do that was so wrong? "She's your daughter, our daughter. You can't just throw her away like this." He looked at me, his eyes hardening. "You don't know what she's done. You've always been too soft on her. I'm the one who's had to pick up the pieces, who's had to clean up her mess. I've tried to be patient. I've tried to be understanding. But she crossed a line." I felt my chest tighten. "What line, David?" "You're talking about our daughter, the girl we raised. You don't just sue your child because of a disagreement. There has to be more to this." His jaw clenched as he stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "She took money from me, from us. It wasn't just a small thing, it was a significant amount, and she lied about it. I found out the truth too late. She didn't even have the decency to tell me. She thought she could get away with it." I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. Money. That was what had driven him to this point. I could hardly believe it. "David, she's our daughter. You're telling me that all of this," I gestured wildly, my frustration spilling out. "This lawsuit, the rift in our family, over money." He looked away, his eyes narrowing as he crossed his arms over his chest. "It's not just the money, Marie. It's the betrayal. It's the disrespect. She thought she could take advantage of me, of us. And I won't stand for it. I won't let her think that she can get away with this. Not again." I was stunned. For a moment, all I could do was stand there, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the one I had spent so many years with. This wasn't the man I had married. This wasn't the father I had envisioned for our daughter. "David," I said softly, my voice shaking, "there has to be another way. We're talking about our family. There's got to be some way to fix this, to talk to her." don't you see? You're tearing us apart." He turned his back to me, staring out the window. His voice was softer now, almost too quiet. "I wish I could fix it, Marie. I really do. But sometimes, people need to face the consequences of their actions. She needs to understand that actions have consequences. And if I have to go this far to make her see that, then I will." The weight of his words hung in the air between us, and I felt my heart crack. I wanted to scream, to shake him and make him see reason, but I didn't. I couldn't. I didn't know how to make him understand that this wasn't the way forward. That family, love, and forgiveness mattered more than pride or punishment. But no matter how hard I tried, I knew it wasn't something he was ready to hear. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," I whispered, more to myself than to him. He didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The man I had once loved, the man I had trusted with everything, had made a decision I could never accept. I couldn't even begin to understand how this was the only way, how this was his solution. I had no words left to convince him. I turned and left the room, the door closing softly behind me. My heart ached, not just for me, but for our daughter, for the family that was no longer a family, for the love that had been broken, piece by piece. The day dragged on, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the house. I paced the hallways, finding it harder and harder to focus. Every corner of the house felt like a reminder of the family we used to be, the family that was now falling apart before my eyes. I couldn't help but wonder what had happened, what went so terribly wrong between my husband and our daughter. I hadn't spoken to her since that morning, since the phone call that had sent my world into chaos. The silence between us felt so thick, it was suffocating. I couldn't ignore the hurt and confusion that had been etched into her face earlier. She looked so small, so lost. I could see it in the way her shoulders slumped, the way her eyes avoided mine when I tried to comfort her. She was falling apart, just as I was, and we were both stuck in this nightmare with no idea how to fix it. The weight of the situation was starting to sink in. Our daughter, the girl I'd raised with so much love, was now being sued by her own father. The thought made my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. How could this be happening? What had happened to the love that had once bound our family together? How had we reached this point of no return? I couldn't stay in the house much longer. I had to talk to her, to understand her side of things. I needed to know if there was something I had missed, some hidden pain or miscommunication that had festered and led to this. I needed answers, just as much as she did. So I walked down the hallway, toward her room, my steps slow and heavy, each one a reminder of how far we had fallen. I knocked softly on her door, waiting for a response. When she didn't answer, I pushed it open slowly, and there she was, sitting on her bed, her head buried in her hands, her sobs muffled but unmistakable. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut. My heart broke for her, for what she was going through, for what she had to endure at the hands of her own father. "Sweetheart," I said gently, stepping inside. "I need to talk to you." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying, and for a moment, I saw the same little girl who used to run into my arms after school, who would tell me every little thing about her day. But now, there was nothing but pain and confusion in her gaze. "Mom. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why is he doing this? I didn't do anything wrong." I sat beside her, my heart aching for her. "I don't know, darling," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know what he's thinking or why he's making this choice. But I want you to know, I'm here. I'll always be here, no matter what." She shook her head, her tears spilling over. "I never meant to hurt him, Mom. I never meant for any of this to happen. I don't know what's going on, why he's doing this to me." Her words twisted like a knife in my chest. She didn't know. She didn't understand. And that made it even harder to bear. How had it come to this? How had our family gone from laughter and love to this? To a lawsuit, to a divide that seemed impossible to bridge. You have to believe me, Mom, she continued, her voice cracking with emotion. I never took anything from him on purpose. I borrowed money, but it wasn't like he thinks. It was just to cover some bills, to help me get through a rough patch. I was going to pay him back, I swear. I never meant for him to find out like this. I listened to her, my heart sinking deeper with every word. I knew my daughter well enough to know that she was telling the truth, that she wasn't trying to deceive anyone. But I also knew my husband, and I could see the damage this had caused him. He had been hurt, deeply hurt, and now we were all caught in the wake of that pain. He doesn't trust me anymore, Mom, she whispered, her voice barely above a sob. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this. My own tears welled up as I reached out to hold her, pulling her into my arms. I know, sweetheart. I know. I'll talk to him. I'll try to make him understand. We'll figure this out. But even as I said those words, a part of me knew they were hollow. I couldn't promise her anything, because the truth was, I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know if it could be fixed. What if the damage was already done? What if my husband's decision to sue her had already created a rift that was too wide to cross? As she cried in my arms, I felt the weight of everything that had been shattered between us. The love we had once shared as a family felt so far away, like a distant memory that I could hardly recall. How had it all gone wrong? I stayed with her for hours, not knowing what to say, just holding her as she cried. I wanted to be strong for her, to be the mother she needed, but I was falling apart too. We were both lost in this chaos, unsure of what to do next, unsure of how to heal the wounds that had been opened between us. When she finally fell asleep, exhausted from her tears, I sat by her bedside, my mind swirling with questions and doubts. I didn't know what had happened between her and her father, or what could be done to fix it. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't let this destroy us. I couldn't let my family fall apart. And yet, as I looked at her sleeping face, a deep uncertainty settled over me. How could I fix this? How could I bring us back from the edge of this terrible divide? The days following my conversation with our daughter felt like a haze. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly, each hour heavier than the last. I couldn't remember the last time I had slept properly. My mind raced with questions and doubts, spinning in endless circles. My heart, too, was caught in a whirlwind of confusion. I had always been the mediator in this family, the one who patched up the cracks, who held everything together. But now, for the first time, I felt utterly powerless. I tried to talk to David again. I tried to understand his decision, to reach out to the man I had once known so well. But each conversation, each attempt to bridge the growing chasm between us, only seemed to widen the gap. His resolve was as hard as stone. He had made up his mind. He believed this was the only way. And no amount of pleading, no amount of explaining, could sway him. He spoke of betrayal. He spoke of broken trust. He spoke of principles and boundaries that had been crossed. But each word, each justification, felt like a wall being built higher and higher between us. I no longer recognized him. The man I had married, the man who had once shown such care for our family, seemed to have disappeared. In his place was someone I couldn't understand, someone who was willing to tear apart the very fabric of our family over what, in the grand scheme of things, seemed like a misunderstanding. And yet, how could I argue with his hurt? How could I deny that his trust had been violated, even if the reasons were not entirely clear to me? There was truth in what he said. Our daughter had made mistakes, she had lied. But was this really the way to handle it? Was suing her, forcing her to face legal consequences, truly the right solution? And if not, what could I do to stop it? The house was still quiet, too quiet, as if the silence itself was mourning the loss of something irreplaceable. I couldn't bear it anymore. The constant tension, the unspoken words, the pain. The weight of it all was crushing me. I had spent so long holding everyone else up that I hadn't realized I was starting to collapse under the strain. I sat alone in the living room late one evening, the darkness outside pressing against the windows, and I finally admitted to myself what I had been too afraid to say out loud. I didn't know what to do anymore. I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know how to repair the broken pieces of our family. I thought back to the day when I first heard the news, when David had told me he was suing our daughter. I remembered the shock, the disbelief, and the growing sense of dread. I had hoped it was a misunderstanding, a mistake that could be fixed with time. But as the days went on, I realized that the wound ran much deeper than I had thought. It wasn't just about money or betrayal. It was about something more, something fundamental that had fractured between them. And now, I was standing at the edge of a precipice, uncertain of how to proceed. I had spent years trying to hold this family together. I had tried to create a home full of love, warmth, and understanding. But now, it felt like I was watching it all slip away. The connection between David and our daughter, once so strong, was now severed, and I didn't know how to reattach it. I knew I had to make a decision. The question was, what kind of decision? Should I continue to stand by David, the man I had spent half my life with, even if I disagreed with his actions? Should I stand by my daughter, who was hurting, who had made mistakes but deserved compassion? Or should I try to do something entirely different, something none of us had considered? I thought about calling my daughter into the room, about telling her that I would fight for her, that I would do whatever it took to make David see reason. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I knew that if I did that, if I chose her, I might lose David forever. The consequences of such a choice were too great, too uncertain. I thought about David, too. I thought about how he had always been a man of principle, someone who believed in fairness and justice. But now, I saw how those principles had become twisted by hurt and anger, how they had hardened into something unrecognizable. If I stood by him, I knew I would be supporting a decision that felt wrong to me in every way. But could I turn my back on him? Could I really walk away from everything we had built together? I didn't know. I didn't know if I was strong enough to make the choice that needed to be made. I didn't know if there was even a right choice anymore. I stood up, walking slowly to the window, staring out into the night. The stars were dim, shrouded by a haze of clouds. And beneath them, I felt utterly alone. There was no clear path forward, no simple answer. Everything was complicated, tangled in emotions and decisions that felt far beyond my control. I wanted so desperately to make it better, to find a way to heal, to fix what had been broken, but I was lost. What was I supposed to do now? What could I do? I didn't have the answers. I couldn't see the way forward. All I knew was that something had changed, irrevocably, and I wasn't sure if anything could bring it back. The love I had for my husband, the love I had for our daughter, both of them seemed distant now, as if I were reaching out to hold on to something slipping through my fingers. And in the quiet of that moment, I realized that I might have lost both of them. The decision I faced wasn't just about choosing between them. It was about deciding what kind of person I was, what kind of mother, what kind of wife I wanted to be. And I didn't know what that looked like yet.
I don't even know where to start. As I read the story, my heart felt like it was being twisted in every direction. It's one thing to read about families facing conflict, but this hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. I could feel every ounce of the wife's confusion, her heartache, the internal battle she was fighting. At first, when I found out that the husband had sued their daughter, I was in shock. It seemed so extreme, so harsh. Who does that? How could a father turn against his own flesh and blood like that? The wife's bewilderment was mine as well. She had every right to be devastated. And then, when I started reading more, I realized how deeply this affected her. She wasn't just shocked by her husband's actions, she was torn between the man she had spent her life with and the daughter she had loved and raised. The betrayal felt so raw, and I could feel it inside of me. But what hit me even harder was when the husband explained himself. He wasn't just cold and distant, he was hurting, too. I could hear the pain in his voice, his justification coming from a place of broken trust. He had been betrayed, too. But it made me wonder, can any of us truly justify taking such a drastic step against our own family, no matter how much we've been hurt? It was like a part of me wanted to understand where he was coming from, but another part of me was screaming, no. This isn't how you handle things. This is tearing everything apart. Then the daughter's perspective. I felt the weight of her sadness and confusion. She couldn't understand why her father was doing this, and I felt every bit of her disbelief. She was still a child in her father's eyes, yet now she was being treated like an enemy, like someone who had committed a crime. And when she said, "I don't know what I did wrong," my heart just shattered. The helplessness in her voice, the way she desperately wanted to make things right, tore me apart. I could feel the pressure on her, the pain in her chest as she tried to understand what had happened. She wasn't some villain in the story, yet here she was, trapped in a situation she couldn't control. But the wife. God, the wife. The way she stood in the middle of all this, caught between the man she loved and the child she had raised, it was heartbreaking. She loved them both, but there was no easy way to make a choice. How could she choose between them? She couldn't. And that realization, that awful, crushing realization, was what I felt the most. Her helplessness, her internal struggle, her loss of agency, it was like I was living it right there with her. She tried to fix it, tried to bring them back together, but how could she when they were so far apart? And in the end, she didn't know how to move forward. She was at a crossroads, standing alone in a house that no longer felt like home. By the time I reached the last chapter, I was exhausted. I felt the weight of everything she was feeling, the emotional exhaustion, the confusion, the heartbreak. I thought about the choice she had to make, to support her husband, to stand by her daughter, or to try something entirely different. And that's where I felt it the most. I don't know what I would have done. How could she possibly choose? And the worst part is, she may never know if she made the right choice. Her decision wouldn't just shape her future, it would shape the future of her entire family. I guess what stuck with me the most was that no one in this story was truly right or wrong. Everyone was a victim of their own pain, caught in a cycle of hurt and misunderstanding. I felt the weight of every decision they made, every word that was spoken. It was hard to read, but it was real. It made me think about my own relationships, the things we overlook, the things we sweep under the rug, and the moment when it all explodes, and there's no way to go back. By the end of it, I was left with a hollow feeling. How does one heal when everything you knew, everything you loved, is falling apart? How do you move forward when there's no clear answer, no right or wrong? I think this story will stay with me for a long time. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes, no matter how much love is there, life doesn't always give us the answers we crave. It doesn't always give us a way to fix things. It's just a painful truth.